Hello. So first, I think we'd like to tell you how pleased we are to be here. We are actually from Porto. Our office is based in Porto. To be more precise, I am Swiss. Philippe and Anna are studied in this building. It's really an amazing building. We encourage you to look at every single joint, every single square centimeter of it. There's a lot to learn from it. It's fascinating. It's a building also, it's quite pleasing to see, this sort of breath of fresh air that comes every year at Porto Academy. A lot of youth, a lot of, let's say, I think it changes and it shakes a bit the way this school usually feels. Also, it's a pleasure for us because we've been sneaking through the back door for quite a few years to attend these lectures. So it's really a pleasure to be on the other side of the fence in a way. So I'm going to start by just saying a few words about us, who we are. Symbolically and actually physically, the office was born in this building that you all know, I'm sure. In that capsule, to be more precise. This is the Capsule Tower, Nakajin Capsule Tower by Kurokawa in Tokyo. Philippe and Anna actually lived in that building for 1 year, and a lot of, let's say this is where the idea of FALA started. And at the time we were doing mostly competitions that we were very proud in losing. This is their actual apartment, so it's about 6 square meters, is that correct? 6 square meters, there were 2 people living there, which I still find absolutely heroic. For 1 year, can you imagine? And in a way, a lot of sense of the utopia and necessarily failed utopia of that building was diffusing into our first competition proposals. This was one that we proudly lost for a library in the south of Portugal. This is us, of course, and this is where the space in which we started actually working as a team. We were, up to a certain point, 10 people in that 20 square meter room, so we like density a lot. You can see it's a bit chaotic. You can see there are books about architects we admire everywhere. This is really the way we work. And we're going to explain later that we actually finally found more square meters to work in. We moved to another place. It's one of our projects that is going to be shown later. And so, to a large extent, our beginnings are a matter of, you could say, faking it until you make it. A lot of smoke and mirrors to pretend to be a respectable office to a certain extent, and until it actually starts becoming a reality. So the sort of childish utopia starts being real to a certain extent. And we called this lecture The Possible Architecture because we want to emphasize the fact that everything we do comes from a certain context. In a way, a lot of things that are considered our style, you could say, come simply from constraints that we try to sublimate in a way. This was also a failed competition. We got a mention for that one, for a kiosk in Chicago. And even, so every single task is glorified as much as we can. This is a birdhouse that we were asked to design. It was probably our favorite client up till now. And we devoted 2 or 3 months, almost full-time, designing that birdhouse, studying what is the behavior of birds, and trying to make it as much of a proud piece of architecture as possible. And you can see that, most of the birds in that little convention were quite intrigued by it. And this is also a crucial moment for us in our beginnings. We did an exhibition explaining and showcasing the contemporary use and the contemporary state of the tower I was showed as the first slide in the Triennale in Lisbon. And the entire exhibition design was based on the same principles as the building, so everything is hanging from a structure that is detached from its context, etc. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it was a quite crucial moment because it's actually from that exhibition that we built ourselves that we got our first client actually came to us because she saw this in the news and was looking for architects in Lisbon. And so this is the first series of projects that we did, mostly apartment renovations in Lisbon, where we tried as much as possible to make something coherent and to bring as much of the dream of the utopian influence of the Nakajin and so on into very banal residential spaces. So this is basically a living room that feels a lot like a gallery space with monochromes on one wall, which are actually doors. And in other cases like this one, we were asked to transform a garage into an apartment for a couple. And in this case, for example, we felt all that energy was already there. So the spatial organization didn't change. We actually fought with the client to make it to change as little as possible. And that was the project. And then, of course, this develops into other projects. This is a house we did recently in the suburbs of Porto, which is also a transformation. But let's say, I think it's also important for us that transformations or new buildings are looked at exactly the same. So for us, the project as the end product is what matters, and it has to be intelligible on its own, without necessarily knowing that it's a transformation. And so this is the first project we're going to show. It's a house in the center of Porto, a very banal kind of building here, actually. This kind of building you've probably seen on the streets. They are basically the main fabric of Porto, and they are always the same typology, more or less 5 meters wide, quite deep buildings. And we were asked to transform this building, which looked like this inside. So there wasn't a lot to preserve, and at the same time, we found that as a good opportunity in a way to make something that, let's say, would find its own vocabulary independently from any kind of nostalgia about these old buildings. So these are a few early sketches about the interior spaces. Our goal, the project was going to be 4 small units, and which have exactly the same requirements. So they're all basically a large studio with a kitchen and a bathroom and so on. And we wanted them to be all different, but at the same time all relatable as one project. So they all have the same vocabulary to a certain extent. So these are all early sketches again. This is the way we work. This is very rough 3D renderings with drawings on top of them. And these are the 4 apartments. So they all have a stepped wall that conceals the bathrooms, which actually it's not the profile of the staircase, it's totally independent from it. And there is a curved surface that is either on the ground floor concealing a common corridor, and on the top floor, because there is no common corridor on that floor, the curved surface becomes the thing that hides the pitched roof. So you can see, and you always have these 2 doors, one to the bathroom, one to the vertical circulation. And so here are the collages that we did. So in a way, all these, you could see this as a totally, let's say, gratuitous, you could say, gesture, but all of the things that are in here are just how to make the most out of the very simple means and the constraints we have. So the white walls are just the cheapest walls we could do. Giving them a shape is a way to give character to the space. The floor is a wooden floor because that's what we were asked for, but we realized we could only afford to have 1/3 of the floor in a richer wood, so we made a pattern out of it. So everything that defines the project in the end actually comes from needs that are instrumentalized, you could say. And so this is the plan of the building as we found it, this kind of really convoluted typologies we very often face. With a lot of rooms that have no natural light. And this is the project we proposed. So very simple. Here you can see how the common corridor I was mentioning on the ground floor actually leads to a common garden in the back, and the floor pavement of the interior spills into the garden. So, and of course, this curve, for example, could be seen as totally random, but actually each of the different moments of it comes from needs. So you have like a need for a certain openness in front of the entrance door, and then for every entrance of the apartments, etc. So these are the 4 apartments. You can see they all speak exactly the same language. They are made of the same things, but they're all slightly different. Here you can see the different elements in place, because we always look at our architecture this way. In a way, there is a white canvas and then movements on top of it. As many movements as we can afford, as many patterns and colors as, let's say, the space needs. And this is the built thing. So you can see the stepped wall being used as a sort of shelf, in relationship to the very tiny kitchen. Here, the entrance to the bathroom. And here you can see this is the facade towards the garden that is not protected, so we can actually intervene there, while on the other side, on the street side, we have to preserve the existing facades. So here we have a different relationship. But I think it also enriches the space in a way. And so a bit like one of the projects that was mentioned before, this is a building with 2 fronts to us. And so here, this is the common garden. And so the front facade, as I was saying, basically the profile had to remain, the general design has to remain. The only thing we did here is to change the old green tiles to green marble, because actually we managed to pretend, in the documents to the municipality it just says natural stone. They, I assume, thought it was going to be marble, that it was going to be granite, and we made it marble, and so it passed. And there's just a dot of marble on the right to balance the weight of the new door, in a way. So this is as built. And of course, when designing the back facades, there we had freedom, so we looked into the stuff we love. This is drawings that some of our students are getting familiar with by Peter Merkli, and this is Aldo Rossi in Tuscany, I think. And of course, Firenze. And so, because we realized one very important thing, which is that marble in Portugal is relatively affordable, and here we managed to do the entire facade out of marble. So it's an absolutely flat facade, and then it's as exuberant as possible. You can see the height of the building aligns with the neighbor. We actually tried several variations where it was sometimes a bit lower, sometimes a bit higher, and this just felt correct in a way. In a way, this is a building that tries to send a message to because this is the side of the city that tourists don't see and therefore is not protected. So this is only visible by the inhabitants of that house and the inhabitants of the neighboring house. So in a way, this is a new front, a new representative thing dedicated to these inhabitants. You can see also that the door is totally concealed within the marble to make it as representative as possible, if that means anything. And above the door here, there's a little sun, just because it felt good, to be frank. I'm gonna...
and it is very possible that the main common thread between our architecture is the lack of resources we are faced with. We work with, contrary to what some people sometimes ask us, we work with a low part of society with very small budgets, and despite the fact that sometimes we do a couple of what one could call commercial projects, We actually are building many times below 400 euros square meter, which for the foreigners, I don't know if it means a lot, but in Portugal it means a lot. It means very little. It's very little money. And as such, we got used with time to understand that every single small opportunity is a crucial opportunity for us to define the path we're gonna go and gonna walk in the next 50 years of an office, we assume. And we learn to look at everything we produce in its context, both social, political, geographical, but also in the context of the practice itself. We are a very young office. I'm the oldest, I'm 32. Everyone goes down up to 22, 21 years old. So as you can imagine, experience is not our main strength. We make mistakes, we value mistakes, we enjoy mistakes. And we sometimes find out that the most beautiful pieces or the most beautiful images we could do of our work are actually hidden in the less obvious places. And sometimes we have the chance to ask an old lady of 85-year-old to go to her apartment and to take a photo of the facade, and she tells us how much she hates it, and we get so happy. Because for the first time in 80 years, she discussed architecture with someone. So if not for the tourists, at least for that old lady, this facade meant something. But at the same time, this is how the city sees us. Recently we were told that we are not that much loved here in Porto, and we were not surprised at all, we knew it quite well. But we felt that maybe we could find a way in an image to describe that in a lecture, and this is the image we decided to do. Because in a way, going down to this reference from Baldassari, it's as if there's a crowd applauding, but our architecture is not present, so you see the image, you see the applause, but you don't really understand what is being applauded. And we got used with time that maybe these projects are going to happen quite often. So it was going to happen once, twice, 3 times. And the first one was, as Ahmed was trying to say, well, it was a kind of manifesto. You know, young office has an opportunity, so it puts too much effort, I would say sometimes even an excess of effort, both in a birdhouse or in a facade. So the projects, they started reacting to each other. So the second project is a reaction to the first, the third is a reaction to the second, and suddenly the projects, they were not operating alone anymore. And we started understanding that in many cases, as I was saying in the beginning, that our main common thread is a certain lack of resources or a certain lack of proper commissions. Proper in a good sense. Designing kitchens, designing bathrooms, sometimes it's what we have. So why not discussing Palladio, why designing a countertop for a kitchen? Why not making the kitchen the whole theme of the project? Why not making a single blue column that holds nothing but defines a very clear tension on a facade, a crucial moment of design? Why not intervene in all of these structures, both 600 square meters palaces, 12 square meters small housing buildings, or finishing unfinished 80 structures in the suburbs with the same energy, with the same passion? Or why not now finally finding out how it is to design a building from scratch, how it is to really invent something that if it was not for us, it would not exist. Of course, most of the times, not to say always, we work with residential projects, we work with housing, houses, apartments, apartment blocks, many times transforming, many times erasing, a few times inventing, and it's really, for us at this moment in the office, one of the most joyful periods, because we are finally seeing things that we invented a few years ago becoming reality. And so far the clients are quite happy with them, so that makes us very happy too. And a few years ago, I would say 2017 more or less, we started noticing that in several of our projects, a certain set of tropes was happening very often. And we started studying them, and between many of them, taking an example, columns that hold nothing, I was very happy to see the previous lecture because we don't need to explain it now. We started noticing that this non-structural column, this column that is an architecture device, not a structural one, that is a column designed by the architect and not requested by the engineer, was somehow recurring with many different motivations, with many different objectives. And we started cataloging them. And then we noticed that besides the columns, there were a few other topics that were somehow so recurring as if we were not thinking about them, we were not planning them, but they were just happening as if, you plant a project and it was naturally growing out of there. And we started understanding that sometimes the column can become a compositional element, other times it just organizes a very dry room, and other times it just marks the highest point of a room. But in none of these cases it holds any beam or it holds any slab, but it holds an architecture, it holds an architectural language, an architectural expression. we noticed that indeed we are fascinated with white backgrounds, the idea that the white canvas is a starting point for any architecture. Maybe because we are reacting to the fact that most times we operate in given buildings, this became a very obvious conclusion. If we paint it only in white, we can act like they were never there. And because you have a white background, you want to detach everything you design in front, doors, shutters, columns, furniture, kitchens. You want to play with dark blue, or you want to play sometimes with subtle hints of pink. And sometimes you have only that opportunity to design a small jewelry piece in the middle of a living room. Other times you can only design the bow hat of that jewelry piece. We learned that sometimes we can clad facades in marble, other times we can only paint them. It's fine, it's okay. The energy is the same, and because it's not expensive marble from a foreign country doesn't make it less of a proud gesture. We learned to play many times with the cheapest banal tiles that somehow define bathrooms, but in facades. And we also learned that once in a while, if not in full, we can use partially the material we are the most fetishist about. We learned that sometimes, because we can only paint walls in white and plaster them, or sometimes even just use gypsum board, we can make the pavement the main theme. You can make the pavement a kind of proud, endless surface that connects everything. Or sometimes just have a small annotation, a small pink line, a small distorted handrail, or maybe a very thin mesh. Or other times just placing these circles that became as, they were suns in our collages, and they slowly started coming down and down and down as a sunset, and now they became part of the architecture itself. And when we produce our architecture, we use different tools. And if we are in a workshop in a summer school, maybe this is the right place to talk about the tools we use to produce them. And we sketch a lot. As Ahmed said, we come from this school, but sketching is a crucial part of our routine, but maybe not in the same way, not in this kind of perspective drawing, but many times in this kind of rhetorical diagrammatic drawing that tries to achieve a kind of hidden logic behind the project that is more important than the final image of the project itself. Every piece of architecture we design starts with a plan, be it a new building or a refurbishment, or be it a small-scale transformation, or be it a gigantic housing block. And the rhetoric behind the plan, the way it's structured, the way it's drawn, it's absolutely crucial for us, because the plan is a set of facts, measurements, it's universal. If you send the same plan to the other side of the world, anyone can read it, anyone can measure it. So the plan somehow is the text that describes the architecture. And it many times has more or less information. We like to draw our plans in single-line drawings, but it shows the hierarchy that some sort of architectural decisions in the project process made, and that make it all make sense as an architecture piece, even if deep down the users of the space will not be able to perceive it in full if not told about it. It's also easy to talk about proportion, this very classical and outdated word, how to balance the composition in a way that, as random as it may seem, it actually can only make sense that way. We learned from very early in the office that most of the times we're going to be working on the interior. We're going to be working with given perimeters. We were not going to design facades, we were not going to design plazas, we were not going to design public spaces many times. So we learned to look at inner elevations as we do when we look at outer elevations. When we look at an elevation of a building, we look at an elevation of a living room in the same way. And we like to display them with a gold background. And we look at the outside facades the same way as we look at inside facades, but for some reason we like to display them with a pink background. And in opposition to the plans and to the single-line drawings that are facts, that are statements, collages became a kind of tool that evolved with the office. They are not final products. They are not done when the project is done. They are actually done right at the beginning, and they keep evolving as a PSD file that we save several JPEG files and that keeps evolving and evolving and evolving. And it does exactly the opposite of the drawing. It doesn't tell you a lot about how you're going to use the space, but it tells you a lot about how you're going to feel the space. And of course, these collages, they have different attitudes. Sometimes they are very abstract because of the project itself. Other times they are quite literal. Sometimes they are just a kind of punchline of an intention of a certain architectural expression. And last but not least, it's crucial for us to understand something we maybe have learned from a very young Kazuo Shinohara, how relevant it is to document what you produce, how relevant it is to understand that probably none of you will ever visit any of our buildings, but most of you might see them somewhere. So the way how we present information, both the information we produce a priori of the project and the projects themselves when they are documented and photographed, it's very, very important for us. So we try as much as possible with the photos we take, usually with the same photographer all the time, to emphasize via the photograph the architectural intentions that both the collage and the drawing were trying to promote. And sometimes it's so beautiful to go a few steps back and to see actually how the living room of that old lady looked like, and how our facade is just a very small piece in this kind of beautiful portrait. We learned also, I mean, our office is not even 6 years old, I would say, so it's very young yet, but one of the main lessons we learned recently is the concept of time. There are different times. Architecture takes too much time, and as Cesar says, it takes too much time and it costs too much money. So it's this understanding of the different paces at which the project runs, it's crucial for us. Understanding the before, the during, and the after of the construction of the building itself. And understanding that sometimes for the before to make sense in the after, in the during, there's something that requires a lot of hidden discussions and hidden decisions that no one will ever know, but could only make sense to achieve this if we would go through them. At the same time, it became clear for us that the buildings also have a time of their own, the precondition of the building itself and the proposal we do. But in order to jump between both, there's this moment of rupture, this moment where even the simplest, driest plastered facade comes from a series of very strategic and sometimes severe decisions and severe gestures on the previous architecture. We also learn to understand that many times we design things that won't happen, and there's a before and an after that never happened, like a promise that was not fulfilled. And other times there are proposals we do that we assume they are not going to happen, and indeed one day we can have this kind of celebration moment where we go there and it actually happened as we planned. And even the fact that the neighbor had the clothes hanging made it so much better. Simultaneously, we started recently this new adventure that architects like so much, which is teaching. And teaching for us, it's a moment of it's different from architecture production, so the kind of discussions and the kind of dialogues we have with our students is very often quite different from the ones we have in our office. But at the same time, at the end of the day, when we discuss it between ourselves, we find out we have been just doing the same thing, but in a different way, as if we are, singing the same song in a different language. And most of our obsessions with this kind of outstanding postmodern architecture from Portugal find a place in this kind of, I'm using this as an example. We have a series of other fascinations, but taking this one as an example, finds a place with our students where suddenly we are talking abroad, because we don't teach in Portugal, so we are talking abroad with people that have no idea about the social, economical, geographical context of Porto, about this architecture, and we are very happy when they come and visit the country that they actually go and visit this, and that they somehow go and take photos to buildings that no one else ever photographed before. And last but not least, we are now in this situation where once in a while we find ourselves as the motive of the exhibition itself, as if this is an exhibition we did in Lisbon a few months ago, where the production of the office, the drawings, the collages, the models, the photos, they all came together in what we like to believe is a project itself. So it's not an exhibition, it is a project of the office whose tiles and whose marble surfaces are actually the projects and drawings and the collages we produced before. But sadly, this is the context in which we work. And just so that you understand, this is a facade that is preserved for decades so that tourists today, they can take good photos of it. And this is a building that is built, 10 years ago, that is made to look like this facade was looking 200 years ago. So in this kind of fake nostalgia, and this kind of sad memorabilia, we have to operate as an office. And I'm just going to present one project, which is a house that we finished a few days ago. And it's in a very nice neighborhood. It's in Fontainhas, which is a quite authentic, in a actual sense of the word, neighborhood in the city center in Porto. And it's a poor building. It's one of these buildings that Ahmed presented before, but in this case, an even less romanticized one. 4.2 meters wide, so very, very narrow, but very, very deep. And I'm not going to talk about front facades because it makes me depressed, but it's, this was as far as we managed to go with the municipality. But inside, it is a building that has about 4.2 by 20 meters in depth, so it's quite unique proportions. Even more if you consider you only have windows on the two short facades at the end. The clients asked us to do a 3-bedrooms apartment, a 3-bedrooms house with a nice living room connected with the garden, and this was the plan. It's not the same plan that Ahmed showed, but it could be. It's always kind of the same thing. And most of these interventions, they happen during the years, so there's a lot of, nothing is actually original anymore. And we understood that by somehow erasing everything that we had found there, and by doing just two completely opposite spatial systems, this is the street side, this is the garden side, we could define all the small private programs we needed on the ground floor, opening the living room towards the long, infinite garden in the front, in the back, and by making this kind of small concessions and spatial adjustments, we could create the bedrooms necessary, fitting them to the windows, making the bathrooms symmetrical, and so on and so forth, and finding a way where we like to say this is an overriding of two systems, where you have a very fluid one-liner on the ground floor, and then you have a very complex and intricate system above. And yeah, this is the diagram. And we managed to understand that maybe materiality could blend it all together. So maybe via the materials we could use, we could find a way to make this all one thing. And this is the main elevation of the living room that is composed by a window, a public passage to the entrance, a cat space, and 4 doors for 4 private programs. And this is what urban refurbishments in Porto look like for us. Everything that has a potential to be preserved is preserved, in this case just the very long and thick granite sidewalls. Everything else was removed. And this is how we imagine this living room, this kind of very long gallery, and the opposite perspective. And this is how it looks today. Well, today it has furniture and people living in it, so it's much better, but this is how it looked 1 month ago when we photographed. And it's quite a, I mean, it's a very cheap building. It was built with almost no money. So again, we only could afford, in this case, 1/4 of a proper wood, but we managed to do the skirting in the proper wood. We had no money to expose a nice concrete slab, so we just did normal plaster, but we used color instead. We could not afford marble to clad a facade, so we just cladded key moments of the project to give it a certain joy, a certain happiness, a certain sense of luxury that in reality is not there. We allowed light to come in via the top floor because it is so complex, the system of rooms, that having a skylight that is actually 5 meters long is not a problem at all. It's invisible above but very important below. And we learned that it's not really about the money. So although sometimes it sounds like we complain a lot, and we do, it's mostly about understanding that if these are the limitations, let's make the best out of it. If we cannot make an outstanding concrete slab, let's choose an outstanding color to paint the ceiling we have. And the small things that, you know, give happiness to the house, they are treated with the same degree of respect. So the kitchen is designed as a project inside the project, and everything is trying to be, you know, a reference to something we saw before. And even the handrail is just an opportunity to do architecture. And above, because of that decision I showed in the collage before, that was made 2 years before, we managed to release the structure of the roof in a way where somehow this kind of pattern of lists on the floor is mimicked above. And by doing that, you end up having all of these very abstract moments where that wood structure that was such a pain for our engineer to calculate without the vertical element in the middle becomes some sort of crucial element of the architectural composition. So although this is an honest structural element, it is more than that an honest architectural device. And it's funny for us to see how all of these rooms, they find, you know, a certain consistency in their differences, a bit like the project Ahmed showed before, but the architectural idea goes through and it makes it all one house. And this is how we imagined it 2 years before, and this is how it looks like today. And they have a daughter, so the daughter asked for some pink on the ceiling, and we were so happy because we always need to find excuses for using pink, but the 5-year-old solved the problem. And these kind of symmetries, they also, you know, when the spatial system is so intricated, it creates these kind of funny moments where the two bathrooms are symmetrical. So actually, in one of them you have the shower and the toilet at the end when you enter, but in the other one, because of the perspective, it seems you have the toilet as the throne at the end of the room. So by using the exact same elements, the same area, the same plan, the same everything, we managed to create two quite distinct bathrooms. And when you lay down on the floor and you look at the ceiling, which is something normal people don't do, only we do, you actually understand that there's indeed something in common, but there is also something distinguishing them. And it's very nice for us, as we heard recently that cheap buildings, when you knock on them, they make a weird sound, but who actually knocks on buildings? No one. And in this case, we thought that it was nice to have this very luxurious surface on the floor, so that when you are taking a shower, so when you're naked and you are just, you know, taking a shower, you actually have your feet touching on a bit of an expensive material. So again, conveying a certain sense of luxury to a house that on its budget had no luxury at all. And the opposite bathroom. But at the same time, if we are honest about it, 99% of the surface is just this kind of generic white tile. And then the back facade, again, in parallel to the previous project, but now not that interesting at all, damaged. And we tried in the facade to be a bit rhetoric, to be a bit didactic almost, to somehow express in the facade what the architecture is doing. So on the ground floor, there's a big open window that somehow reflects the one-liner of the living room. On the middle level, there's a framed window that somehow reflects this kind of more complex composition of spaces on the second level. And the fronton that hides the classical pitched roof from Porto has this kind of patterned surface that has a kind of funny reflection of the structure you see inside. And then when all of these moments come together, it's interesting to see how the inside and the outside, they all somehow merge. And from the garden, you actually don't see the middle level, so you only see the fronton, which was very important for us. And again, we had endless discussions in the municipality because it was not harmonious. And if it's not harmonious to the municipality, we have to, I don't know, deliver 20 times the project. But deep down, it's completely fake. I mean, there's a small beam at the top, but the top 90% of the fronton, they are just there for a certain architectural expression again. So in this kind of scenario, this becomes a certain, let's say there's a Palladian attitude to it, but it's not Palladian at all. And this is how the building comes together. The two spatial systems, a very cheap paint in the ceilings, and the proud composition of the back facade.
So my turn now. All the projects we do in the office, of course, they are related to each other because it's the same people doing them. But at the same time, because we always work more or less with the same kind of programs, we try to diversify as much as we could. We could almost repeat the same floor plan in 4, 5, 6 projects that we have because they have the same kind of typology and volume, but we always try to find our own interests in the way we produce our projects. And at some point, when we also started to look at the elements that Philip was talking about, we started realizing that actually we don't have a lot of islands as projects. We actually have small archipelagos of projects that relate to each other, that have similarities, or sometimes they have opposites, but they were all designed either together or as an opposite response to a previous project. So for example, when we started designing our first buildings from scratch, our houses, the first house we designed and we were asked for a 3 bedrooms apartment, all with private house, 3 bedrooms house, all with private bathrooms. And we decided to create all these volumes and niches inside a perfect space, and those shapes actually define the public area. So it's a direct reflection of what happens in the private areas, defines the public areas. And having the opportunity to actually design something also from the outside, we decided to make this building or not showing at all what was happening on the inside, but at the same time showing everything. So all the facades are the same because they all have one square window for the bedrooms, one round window for the bathrooms, 2 doors, and a big window for the living room. But then when we were asked to design exactly the same program for another house, we decided to do a little bit the opposite. So it was not so much about like being so pornographic regarding how we organize the program, but we decided to have a very simple common area. So we said that this is a little bit more erotic because it doesn't show everything in the public area. So there's a very big living room that these are quite old pictures that actually have a quite presence on the outside, but then on the inside, behind this wall, all the private areas happen with different shapes to solve different problems, but you actually don't perceive that as an outside or as a public space. So these houses, the way we also started designing these facades, before we were in the previous project, we were using exactly this size of windows, but in a more repetitive way where you don't really perceive which facade is the main facade. And this one is also a house with a square plan, but this one we really decided that this is the main facade, but then actually we make the chimney with the same proportions as the entrance door, and the chimney becomes even more important than the entrance of the house itself, because when people pass, you see first this side and not actually the front side. Other times when we are asked to do renovations, it's not always that we have old traditional buildings. For example, this was a factory of clothes that the previous owner designed it somehow to look like a house, to try to merge with the surroundings. And when we were asked to transform this into a housing block, again, almost no money is social housing standards. We decided to transform this factory into a housing block that looks more like a factory than it actually looked before. But to achieve this, again, there's a lot of additions and removing to achieve a very simple facade in the end, in terms of composition, then cladding with insulation. And even though it's a very brutal and simple facade, we use all traditional elements, or even using rain pipes to emphasize the transition between a certain rhythm and a break to the other facade. So it's something that we always try to use. And then on the opposite side, you actually don't see almost the building, because for the street side it has only 2 floors, and it merged with the greenery that surrounds it. And on the opposite hand, so with a completely defined budget for a social housing project, we were asked to design a pavilion in a garden for an art piece that we didn't really know what was going to be the art piece. So it's really just talking about architectural elements and mixing those elements to define a fully project where we use a perfect square cube, but actually we painted the top so that you actually don't perceive it as a perfect cube. We have 4 exactly the same similar facades. Then each one has a different element, either a different door with circles again marking the entrance, and then the small mistakes that Philip was also talking about. That when we realized that the art piece that was going to happen inside was a video. So, sorry, these are the elements that I was talking about. When we found out that it was going to be a video, we realized we didn't have a place to put a beamer. So we decided to add an element that was crossing the entire project, has a red element that pops out, and then just for ventilation purposes, we originally had that circle, and we used just a circle for the beamer. So it feels that we thought about it, but it was all like improvisations on site, and all these elements come together as a statement almost of all the elements we usually use in our projects. And sometimes these funny projects bring us other clients, and this was the first time we got a client that came to us saying, I really like the project that you did, so I want you to do something similar. Usually people don't even know that we are called FALA. They know me, or they know Philip, or they know Hamed, and sometimes we send contracts with the name FALA, and like, I think you send us the wrong contract, because who's FALA? Like, so this was the first time that we actually got a client that knew who we were, and asked us, okay, I want to transform this small shack for my son into a small house. And in that moment, when we started developing the project and we realized that we couldn't fit a bathroom, we decided to make an extension of the proudest bathroom ever, and making the main topic of that element the bathroom, and not being shy about that kind of extension. And when you look from far, of course, it didn't need to be as high, but if you say that you did a bathroom or a shower extension, it feels sad. But when you show this shower, like, it's a proud shower, like it was the proudest moment that we had, and the clients, they just accepted everything we proposed. We never imagined that they would actually approve a 9 meters tall tower with a pink triangles pattern. So it was a very nice moment. But actually the client, so this is a view from the window of the main house. And the client said, well, actually now when I open the window, I don't see this very big red supermarket that he has behind. He actually looks at the tower first before he actually sees the supermarket, so he's very happy that this element became the most important thing out of his window. And again, when you are asked to do a stage or an enclosed pavilion, there's millions of ways that you can actually do a project, and it's quite hard to, when you don't have a client saying, I don't like this, I don't like that. We doubt ourselves a lot, and we keep discussing a lot and doing a lot of options. But in the end, we thought it made sense to have this kind of rectangular shape that mimics a little bit all the pavilions that happen around the complex, the military complex. And we decided to do this building with 4 completely opposite facades. So maybe because we are, I don't know, maybe it's a reaction of the buildings we are doing here that have 2 main facades, very long ones, then 2 side facades that you don't completely see. So we decided to do a moon facade, a cat facade, that happen on the both ends of the main stage, pavilion, whatever you want to call it. And this is made out of a very complex, very simple, but at the same time a lot of material in terms of structure to create steps, because one of the requirements was that people could go there and sit on the steps to have lunch during the rest of the time that the festival is not happening. And actually the most impressive thing is that this pavilion was built in 10 days by 20 students with 2 more supervisor organizers and 1 carpenter every 2 days. And they built a 300 square meters pavilion by themselves. And this was the team, and we are very, very proud. And to be honest, until it was finished, I never believed it would happen. So it was a quite amazing experience. So these 2 are the main facades that you actually, here you can see what's happening in the background, but there you really see them as independent elements. And then the side facades, the one that we call the feather facades, the feather facade and the roof facade, one for the DJ and the other one for the facing the rest of the garden and the campus. So this is the moon facade, where you actually see, when there's people there, you see the feet of people. The feathers facade relating to the neighbors. The cat facade with a small entrance on one of the sides, and the cat facade from far. And the roof facade that actually there's a lot of vegetation around, so it gets a bit disguised and protected regarding the rest of the environment. And these are the inner elevations, so from the main project, that we also designed, but this time not as fully independent facades, but has, because you will see them together when you're inside the space, with similar elements coming together, and the structure or emphasizing other structural elements that we needed to add, even the beams that need to cross to hold the project itself, and then adding mirrors, disco ball. Well, it's an electronic festival, so you need those elements marked also. Yeah, we wanted them, like, it was no need, but like it was the first time, and it's like 1.1 meter, like it's huge, so it's quite impressive. And this was the inauguration during the evening, and at night actually starting to be used as a project. So here you can see that there's not a main facade, so this could be the main facade, or this could be the main facade, so it's 4 independent elements, but that can survive on its own, but create one full project. And as Ahmed said in the beginning, we changed our atelier quite recently, and we bought a tiny building still in the center of Porto. That was a building from the 40s that we, like, half concrete, half stone, half wood, very weird, that we decided to transform into our atelier and also into housing for ourselves. So that was the front facade, this was the back facade. As you can imagine, we kept the front facade, we destroyed the back facade. And this was the original condition. We just kept the staircases because there was original 3 entrances, and each entrance leads to a different floor for a different program. So there's very different elements happening, and very different structural organizations in terms of program and spaces, but there's a lot of elements that repeat along the project, and that gives consistency to it. So on the front facade we just painted and added new colors to the doors, and we added a hat that I'll show after, and these are the several elements that repeat through the project. So you go up, and this is the hat that I was showing before. So there's this central space, and this planet is more cellular, so one main space, symmetrical facades all around, with a very, so we in the beginning we thought we were gonna make a connection to the roof, but then there was no money to build a stair and a window, so we just put it glass brick, and after that we actually realized that because this is facing south, it creates a lot of light effects. Philip usually says like it's our Eliasson moment, but in a cheap way. And this happened because at some point we thought, okay, we are going to keep the structure that existed there, but you start demolishing one wall and everything fails. So we redesigned everything from scratch. And we just decided, okay, let's add one special moment in the top floor, even though if it's not a roof access, and we made it super proud. And we took these pictures before the scaffolding was taken down, so no one sees actually this facade. Those tall buildings see this, and this one there's nothing in front, so it's a picture to remember what's there, but no one will ever see it again. And from the inside, just a little bit of exposed concrete that we could afford, we kept it exposed, and everything else is white and perfect. And it's a 5 meters tall space, and all the other ones around only have 3 meters. Sorry. Then the middle floor has one studio apartment with a corridor leading to the back, bathroom and kitchen again in the same system, playing a bit with pink. Usually clients don't like pink, so we decided to use a lot of pink in our project to show them it can work. I still don't think they are very convinced, but this is the main element of this central space. So there's a door, there's a cat door, for a cat that now already exists, but it's getting too big that now he needs to go like down to pass the door, with a round window and with the exposed beam that we needed to had to reinforce the structure, and these two main doors that define the space. So this is Fonseca before the cat arrived. And this is the main elevation. Then when you go down to the space of the office, it's a little bit more complex. We had to demolish a lot of things. We had to reinforce beams that were cut before by someone. We had all this complexity of elements because of the staircases inside. And there's a lot of moments like this that we are just there with the construction team just marking a curve, because you cannot really design this. It's really when the construction it's happening that we start defining a few elements. It's still a gypsum ceiling, so we still have the same square meters. We just change the shape, and it doesn't cost more to create these funnier moments that hide the stairs of the top floors. And this is one of my favorite pictures also because it shows one column, 2 columns. So this column was designed by our engineer to support the entire facade of the back. This column, it was our decision because we needed this beam, but this beam could just finish on the wall and that was it. But we decided to make it stop 20 centimeters before and adding a column that was designed by the architects and not by the engineer, just to have this element marking and not this brutal concrete element that we needed to add on the project. And this is before furniture also, and you can see the beam reinforced. So all the concrete elements that we added, we exposed. Everything else we just painted in white or cladded with gypsum. And there's this very big facade facing the garden, and these are the several elements of this facade. And again, we have one column that holds nothing, just to really mark the composition of our facade. And it's quite often the contractors come and say, like, I think in your drawings you had the column in the wrong position. Are you sure it's not like there? And like, it's a fight. Like, no, it's right. Trust us. Yeah, but it's in the wrong. No, trust us. That's where we want it to be. So we painted our full facade. We made it super proud, super bright, and we just kept everything that was that happened from demolitions originally, and this is our new garden. So in the back facade, we demolish everything. We build a new facade, closed for the housing side, completely open on the office side. To build it, we had to build first our facade and then demolishing the facade in the back for structural reasons. And this is our project.
All right, so just a few words to finish. I mean, to try to summarize what would be our main message is really that we try to make the most out of every opportunity. This was, I'm not going to explain the full project, but this is a factory that the owner of it's a textile factory. The owner actually needed to add a new staircase and elevator, mostly because he needed it, and for fire reasons he needed a new staircase. And we could have just given that, and we took the opportunity to try to make it, to give a new face to the entire building. And because it's a textile factory, we played with many different kinds of patterns. We went through, this is just a small portion of the options we went through. Actually, there are probably like 200 or something like this. And this is what we proposed in the end. So in the end, we tried, of course, it disguises what is needed. It also becomes a new main entrance, and it looks a bit like a Dalmatian elephant. It's a bit, and there's a tree on top. But so, of course, this looks maybe unnecessarily exuberant, but, as a face of a company, it says a lot, I think. And this is all simply white tiles with a few bits of marble. And actually, even within the very strict budget we had to just solve the technical issue, we managed to fit this. So we hope this one is going to be built soon. This is the full thing. So you see, we did a few small changes on the inside of the rest of the building, but, this new head was really the main piece to us. And this is another project that we are working on now, which should start construction very soon. It's a housing it's 15 small apartments close to the train station that is being renovated now in Porto. And as you can see, the context is a bit ambiguous and weird. There are housing blocks on the other side of the street, as you see on the top left, and factories all around our building. Actually, one of the requirements that the municipality asked us is that if we build a new building, it has to be within the volume of the factory that was there, which is demolished. And so we actually managed to convince the client to build the full volume, even when unnecessary in terms of square meters. And because he wanted all these apartments to be exactly the same in terms of square meters, we accepted that. That was a given. But we tried to make them as spatially rich as possible. So each apartment in the end is different. And these are all the living rooms, actually, so you can see the diversity. Some are 8 meters tall, some have, some sort of weird skylight, some have, there's really a quite large diversity. And this is all the bathrooms, which are also all different. And this is all the different perspectives you would have. So this is always looking in two directions in each of the apartments. You can see that this one has a flying column, this one has this stepped shelves above the bathroom, etc., etc. But they're all made of the same materials, so this brings the project a bit together. And so we did this types of collage to explain the whole thing. This is, again, the flying column, which is pink, of course. And again, there are dozens of these. And so this is the place. Actually, here you can see the old factory that is now being demolished. And in a way, even for projects that you could say, this is basically a commercial project, we consider doing that only if we manage to make it wild to a certain extent. It's never fully tame. So on the very last apartment has the profile of a cat. You can see it here. It's preying on the highway. This is from the highway nearby. So, a bit like a cat, it's never fully tame. So this is it. Thank you.